Welcome to this lecture on social class and inclusion. This is based on sport and physical activity. However, we aren't going to discuss those fully in this lecture, as the content applies more to sociology. Whilst you're listening, please take notes and attempt to apply this to sport and physical activity. The aims of this lecture are to initially consider the terms social class and social stratification. We will then explore particular theories of social class, including Marxism, Gramsci, Weber and Bourdieu. We will then explore historical and current viewpoints of social class groups and hierarchies, and finally consider underpinning issues and theory to give you the sociological tools to deepen your analysis and understanding. Theoretical lenses are a way of looking at something specifically. We are essentially trying to sharpen our image on something, or in other words, look at something from a particular viewpoint or theory. We can start to consider the wider social and cultural issues associated with sport in the community through these different lenses or theories. We can then start to consider and analyse why it is, or why is it that some people are included, and why is it that some people are excluded from community sport, using social class as a way of exploring this. Bell wrote an introductory text in 2009, which isn't too heavy and is a recommended read. She discusses sociological analysis and attempts to explain or critique the social relations and functions of sport, its practices, institutions and forms. This may help us understand why some institutions are the way they are in sport. For example, why are some institutions still dominated by white men? Why do we still have racism in sport? Sociological analysis helps us to be more critical of sport from an inclusion lens. We could start by considering what are the key determinants of social class. These are essentially things that underpin or influence social class. Now at this point you may wish to pause here and write down some of your thoughts. Some obvious answers may include your job, where you were born, where you live, your friendship groups, etc. But we'll unpick more of these as we go through this lecture. We could then consider why social class matters when discussing sport and physical activity. Now again, you may wish to pause here and write down some of your thoughts. Your answers here may include how social class can affect which sport opportunities you have access to, and which are socially acceptable for you to join in with. This can include what you can afford and parental support. There is no universally accepted definition of social class in the literature, which is common in sociology subjects. There are definitions, and it will be important for you to find a definition which matches your understanding and perspective of social class. Social class is often referred to by grouping people based on shared characteristics. These characteristics would include wealth, income, prestige, power, lifestyle, education, and culture. Now we can consider social relations and social structures from an agency perspective. We'll talk more about agency as we go through this slide. We can consider these on a micro level by looking at individual relationships with other individuals, or at a meso level by looking at relationships individuals have with different sport organisations. We could also explore this at a macro level by exploring what relationships people have with wider society. Within that, sport plays a role in shaping the world. Sport isn't apart from society, and Giddens discusses how sport shapes society, but is also shaped by society, so it has this two-way relationship. Now, agency in a sociological context is about your choice and decisions. For example, how much choice have you had to watch this recording? This is your agency. This could be compulsory for you to watch, or it could be something you're advised to watch, or it could be something you find yourself but choose to because you need to understand this more for an assessment, or it could be something you found and have chosen to watch this for your own interest. Each of these suggests a different agency or a different amount of free choice. We can consider social structure as what is acceptable in different contexts. For example, our behaviour changes depending on who we're with, where we are, what we're doing, etc. These behaviour changes are because the social structure suggests to us that we should behave in a certain way. So within this, we can start to consider how much free choice we actually have. We can start to consider socialisation processes around how children are brought up by their families, what their values and beliefs are because of what their family instilled to them. We could also consider ideology, for example, how the world is, or how the world ought to be. How much are our choices influenced or constrained by social structures or social norms? For example, the school we went to, or the clubs we join impact who we are and the choices available to us. For example, I went to a primary school where sport wasn't seen to be that important, but we had a few parents who were really interested in football and started a school football team. As there weren't other competing sports and our facilities were limited, most of the school became interested in football and gained opportunities to do football. Different schools will have different opportunities. We could look at this as a state school versus public school debate, where one typically creates opportunities in certain sports, whilst the other typically creates opportunities in different sports. We could also consider where we live. For example, you may live in an area with a professional cricket club, but no professional football club. Therefore, your opportunities to progress higher up a pyramid will probably be in cricket. At this point, it's worth considering how agency and structure debates influence our understanding of sport and social class. This may be a good point to pause and take stock so far. We could consider the idea of social stratification, where society is divided in a hierarchy based on unequal groups, or layers, or what's known as strata. We can then consider how this manifests itself into sport. This comes through the idea of access, control, social mobility. The social mobility is the extent to which you believe your class position is fixed, or how far you feel you could move your class position. So social mobility is being able to move between strata. This could be through income, but also other measures such as education, professions, jobs, and others. Social class is a term used by social scientists to group people in hierarchy groups. The picture here is old, but we can see people wearing top hats, and we can see children with their hands in their pockets looking a little bit scruffy and clearly showing a difference in social class. The UK has this built into our social cultural fabric, and we still see it today. Our politics is built on this, with politicians born into this higher lifestyle, their children going to public school and being bred to believe that they are better than others. We still have public versus state school issues with social stratification and a royal family which personifies this. There's no consensus on the meaning of the term. Therefore, there are different ways to describe and measure classes, and we're going to come to those later on in this lecture. The meaning of the term has changed over time and in different contexts. One of the ways we can think about this is through social theory. As a starting point, we'll explore the theory from Karl Marx. Marx was a socialist and a revolutionary thinker. He initially suggests there are two main classes, the bourgeois and as the capitalists, who own the means of production, as in they own the facilities and the equipment, for example land and machinery. Then there were the proletariat, who were the working class and could only survive really by selling their labour to the capitalists. E.g., they get paid to work, but they're selling their labour, they're selling their hours to capitalists. Marx also believed that people from the same class had some commonality or similar interest, and he called this a class consciousness, where this is seen as fixed and people didn't really step outside of their class. It's very much a have and a have not. Modern society is characterised by social divisions based on unequal distribution of economy or economic value, social and cultural resources. Marx focused predominantly on economic divisions, and although money does influence people socially and culturally, so he believed economic factors were more of the oversight and more important because they impacted the others. Now, we can still see this today. So we think about Jeff Bezos. He's the owner of Amazon. He's one of the richest people in the world. He's worth billions and is a capitalist in this Marx definition. Now, who works for Amazon? Well, it's the working class who are selling their time to him and the company. Most of these, not all, granted, but most of these people will be on relatively low wages and they will be without brilliant working conditions. For example, there have been issues about Amazon employees being labelled as self-employed so they don't get the benefits of being employed, allowing Amazon and the owner, or the shareholders, such as Jeff Bezos, to take more money instead of distributing this across the workers. Now, this creates conflict. So, hundreds of years ago, Marx proposed a revolution to overthrow capitalism. And we've seen a number of attempts to do this. The obvious one was communism with Russia and the Soviet Union. But most attempts to overthrow capitalism have failed. And we live with the issues of capitalism today in an accepting way, and we don't really challenge those issues. Now, Marx developed this by seeing a conflict for power between the upper, middle, and working class groups. Central to his theory is whoever controls the means of production essentially forces the others to sell them their labour and to work for them. The owners of production was able to gain profit through this, and Marx called this exploitation of the working class. Not everyone would agree with that. But for example, any surplus that the company makes, well, it goes to the owners. So it leaves the working class down at the bottom of the class system and unable to work their way up. And then the owners or the employers make even more money and retain that power. Now, when resources are scarce, those who have it hold the power. We therefore have issues of inequality which can come in the form of economic, political and or social. For example, there are a number of examples where people gain by connecting themselves with politicians, or exploit their workers, or gain socially by being part of an exclusive club just for the rich. Marx considered this from an economic focus, and we can link this to community sport today, where we essentially have a situation where sport is run by volunteers. We know how brilliant volunteers are, but essentially the whole system operates through non-payments, and arguably exploitation of people. Now, Antonio Gramsci developed Marxist theory by focusing on social relationships with power and culture. Gramsci used the phrase that power is maintained through ideological control in civil society. And we see this today. For example, people may be more left-leaning and associate themselves with trade unions and workers' rights. Others may be more right-leaning and think it's more about every person for themselves, and why should we support those on benefits of our money? There are those that are marginalised within this. For example, traditionally women, and more recently or more commonly or throughout time, different ethnicities or origins, people with a disability, children, etc. So how does society look after these people across these different ideological perspectives of the way the world should be? Gramsci discussed this idea of hegemony, where more dominant groups maintain power, control, and leadership through cultural practices. This can be through propaganda and mass media, and there are a number of issues today around social media and how people are targeted so others can maintain their power, control, and leadership. Hegemony is derived from the Greek word hegemon, meaning leader. Hegemony means leadership or dominance. In this context, moral leadership. Hegemony is never fully fixed, and there is a constant battle over which ideas take place. For example, Our beliefs are different to our parents, probably, and different to our grandparents. So we've seen ideology change over generations, and we'll see it change over future generations. Thinking about this in sport, there is a dominant viewpoint that sport is good for us, physically and mentally. However, people who don't do sport may be problematised. For example, how do we get these people to do sport? Max Weber's theory of social stratification was based on 3 independent factors: class in respect to a person's economic position in society, status in respect to a person's prestige or popularity, and power in respect to a person's ability to get their own way despite the resistance of others. We see these things come together. Social class is not just our economic status, but is also concerned with forms of social reproduction and cultural distinction. Social reproduction is the passing of social inequality across generations. For example, some families have money or don't have money, and this stays with their children and grandchildren. This is the opposite of social mobility. Family is a significant way of economic reproduction. For example, the passing of houses or companies, or having nothing to pass on through inheritance. Cultural distinction is about how some people or some things are worth more than others culturally. For example, going to the opera versus going to the cinema. These have a different cultural standing in our society. This can also include the way we talk, the clothes we wear, the things we enjoy doing. These become embodied into us. Now it's worth pausing here and considering why this matters for sport and physical activity. Bourdieu discussed how there are 3 types of capital, each one which conveys certain advantages. The first being economic capital, as we've discussed previously. The second being cultural capital, for example gaining educational qualifications like degrees and engaging with cultural goods. Now this leads to the third type of capital, which is social capital. For example, developing networks and connections with people. These 3 can influence each other, and all of these can influence our social class. These are all the ways of breaking social reproduction, rather than people not being able to progress beyond their parents' level of social class. Bourdieu highlights how middle classes have greater opportunities across these 3 capitals to move social class and can take advantage of these, whereas the working class continue to find it difficult to move social class across these 3 capitals. Developing social capital and the connections between people that are based on values of trust, mutuality and dignity, and which results in friendliness, compassion and cooperation. An issue in developing these connections to aid our social capital is that we end up trusting people like us. This could lead to clubs and community sport becoming a site of exclusion. Voluntary sports clubs are a great example of social capital in action, but that doesn't make them inclusive. They can potentially be exclusive in practice because we connect with people who are similar to us, and therefore clubs can become have lots of people who are similar within their club and therefore become exclusive by accident. Sport England have made a big deal about social capital, showing how coaching contributes to the well-being of participants and coaches through social connections. Now, in the UK, we've got this traditional strata model. The upper class are who are fewer in number and who own most of the resources. Typically, we think about the aristocracy or the royal family in the UK. We've then got the middle classes who are more secure with their jobs and aren't as reliant on the upper classes. Then we've got the working or lower class who are dependent on the upper class to buy their labour, but are also exploited by this and earn low wages and don't have much job security and live close to or even inside like a poverty line potentially. We've then got stratification, which is completed through the National Readership Survey. This is divided into 6 strata, not 3, with the middle class at the top, ignoring the higher upper class, and the middle class is broken itself into upper middle and lower middle class, and then the working class is then divided into skilled, working and non-working. And this is completed by marketing companies so they can target their productions at people, their products at people. We've then got the national statistics, who have divided us into 8 strata. Levels 1 and 2 are higher occupations. Levels 3 to 5 are intermediate, and levels 3 and 4 are intermediate, and levels 5 to 8 are lower occupations. You'll see this in the Sport England Active Live survey, with a correlation between class across these 8 strata and sport participation. For example, people in the lower groups are less likely to be active and take part in regular sport compared to those higher. So social class is evident in sport participation. This looks at job, therefore it's a single dimensional way of viewing social class. The Great British Class Survey looked at class defined by economic capital, cultural capital and social capital. Applying the social theorists we looked at earlier, and taking a multi-dimensional look into social class. And the survey revealed 7 social classes, with only 39% of people fit in the traditional upper, middle and lower class system. So they looked at a new way of thinking about social class through these 3 forms of capital, and then through a calculation across each of these. So the elite group scored highest on all 3 capitals. Then the established middle class scored highest in 2 but second in cultural. And as we can see, that this pattern continues as we go down, right the way down to the very bottom level. We'll see that it's factored in all 3 capitals, and calculated them to work out kind of where you would be on this 7 strata model. Now, a person's social class has a significant impact on their life chances. For example, education. Wealthy parents can send their children to exclusive schools where they do better than working class children. Middle class parents have a better choice of good schools, and a greater percentage go on to university because of where they live. And some working class children see acquisition of knowledge as outside their class and therefore undesirable, or not cool, or not the thing to do. Now, a person's social class also has a significant impact on their health and nutrition. Working class families have higher rates of infant mortality, cancer, cardiovascular disease and disabling injuries. Working class families have lower levels of nutrition. And the third area is employment. Working class people suffer alienating routine work with physical health hazards, injury and even death. So social class is significant in terms of influencing lifestyle. We may consider the impact of social class on our income and wealth, health and life expectancy, social habits, educational achievement, housing, sports and leisure participation. We've seen an expansion of the middle class, a change in working patterns and the privatisation of many of our services. And this impacts the aspects of sport provision, such as times that we can go, costs of sport, expectations of quality and facilities, the activities that are wanted by people, and many others. So as we said near the start, sport is a reflection of society, but also influences society. The changes we've seen to social class is manifested in sport and is important to consider from an inclusion lens.